Mother and two daughters massacred right in their home. So it really, has sort of all the ingredients of a sensational crime.
New details are revealed in a triple homicide that shocked the world when a BBC commentator arrives home to find his wife and two daughters brutally murdered. The suspect allegedly used a crossbow to carry out the gruesome attack.
So this wasn't something that happened in a split second. This is something that went on for a period of time, and it's beyond even our comprehension to imagine the fear and trauma that they were experiencing at that point.
That's criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matt Mangino, who joined us to help understand the new bombshells in the case.
So those details are horrific, and I think they're going to be important to figuring out exactly how this was carried out and why it was carried out.
For this story, we have to travel across the pond to the town of Bushey, Hertfordshire, England. That's about 20 miles northwest of London. That's where BBC commentator John Hunt lives, but he wasn't home for most of the day on July 9th. Instead, he was about a 2-hour drive away at the Lingfield Park racecourse where he was working. It wasn't until about 7 o'clock that night when Hunt got home and was met with an unforgettable tragedy. Hunt's wife and two daughters were badly injured, and all three eventually died. When we first reported on the story last month, we knew that the women were attacked with a crossbow, but at a hearing just this week, we learned some new details. The two daughters, 28-year-old Hannah Hunt and 25-year-old Louise Hunt, both died as a result of the crossbow injuries, but their mother, 61-year-old Carol Hunt, died from a stab wound to the chest and abdomen.
Well, it's a horrific crime, certainly. The manner of death, using a crossbow and I would assume a knife too, from what I've read in the news reports. But a mother and two daughters, massacred right in their home, and then obviously they're the spouse and children of a well-known BBC sports commentator. So it really has sort of all the ingredients of a sensational crime.
At the hearing this week, we also learned some key information about Hannah Hunt. But when first responders arrived, she was evidently still alive. So, as I'm sure they're hoping to salvage whatever they can as far as her wounds, do you think they were asking her questions at the time about what happened?
Well, I think if she was conscious and she was lucid in any way, I'm sure that those were some of the initial questions that they asked. Obviously, her wounds were mortal, and she didn't survive long. But if there was any way that they could get some information about the perpetrator, and maybe that is why uh, very quickly they were led to this relationship that she had formally, and that was the focus of their manhunt at that point.
She actually texted someone saying she'd been tied up and asked them to call police. We don't know who she texted because they were just listed as an unidentified person during the hearing. But we also know that Hannah called 999, the United Kingdom's emergency number, after the attack. The phone call was dropped, but not before Hannah gave dispatch the address of the crime scene. And as far as her texting for help or calling emergency responders for help, is that something that she should have done? I mean, it makes sense that when you're in an emergency situation, you do the best you can. However, it sounds like they were tied up, that they may have been in a hostage type situation for a
Mhm.
while. Do you think that that was the correct route for her to take?
Well, I would think that as soon as she had access to a phone and was able to do that, I certainly think that's the appropriate thing to do. We don't know the context, at that point. I mean, had her mother or had her sister already been killed? Did she realize, what was, ahead, and in desperation, she's calling for help. Obviously, this was, an unimaginable situation. As you said, Sierra, they were bound. She was tied up when she was found. So this wasn't something that happened in a split second. This is something that went on for a period of time, and it's beyond even our comprehension to imagine the fear and trauma that they were experiencing at that point.
Right now, the triple homicide is still under investigation. So while we have some new details, there may be more on the way. So, is this something that investigators will really be zeroing in on, like the details as far as the crime, the murders themselves?
What they're going to look at is, what was the reason for this? And we know that there was a possible relationship between one of the victims and the suspect in this case. But I think they're going to want to try to delve into the details of how this was carried out.
So that leads us to the suspect in this case, 26-year-old Kyle Clifford, who had a close history with the Hunt family.
It appears, at least, again from what I've read, is that the victim who had a relationship with the suspect, was still alive when police arrived, which gives me the impression that she was maybe the last to be killed. And the horrific idea that maybe, her mother and her sister were killed in front of her, as some sort of, you know, revenge for breaking up this relationship. So those details are horrific, and I think they're going to be important to figuring out exactly how this was carried out and why it was carried out.
And you touched on this, that the victim who had dated or had a relationship with the suspect in this case was the last one, we believe at this point, to have been wounded. Do you think the order of the attack makes sense, whether it was the mother, sister, and then the ex girlfriend? Does any of that factor in at all?
Well, we would only be, surmising, but if that is the case, was the murder of the mother and the sister, you know, sort of demonstrated or carried out in the presence of the victim who the suspect had a relationship with. So was it sort of like an execution in front of her to just you know harm her in every way that he could before he actually took her life as well? If you think about the circumstances, it's truly beyond comprehension.
Investigators were able to identify Clifford as a suspect almost right away, and it's possible Hannah Hunt directly told them who to look for. So, as detectives processed the crime scene, other investigators began the search for Clifford, a manhunt that stretched overnight. UK police put out bulletins warning residents of that area that Clifford could be armed and dangerous. First responders eventually caught up with him on July 10th, about 30 minutes from the crime scene in Enfield, England. But there was about a 24-hour period where there was a manhunt for him. So, a day long, they were searching for this triple homicide suspect, only to find him near his hometown in a cemetery. Why do you think it would have taken so long for investigators to track him down?
Well, obviously, again, this is something that we just talked about a moment ago. This is flight, so he's on the run. So typically, uh, they ID'd him, and they're going to go and reach out to the people that know him best, and where his address and places that he frequents, and they're going to reach out to friends and relatives and in an effort to track him down. But if you're trying to hide, being found within 24 hours is not really bad. I mean, that's, I think, pretty competent police work to track them down in that period of time. Because if you want to make yourself sort of elusive or invisible, you certainly would be able to sustain that for some period of time. So I don't necessarily think a manhunt that tracks a triple homicide suspect in 24 hours is bad police work.
Law enforcement found Clifford in a cemetery in Enfield, and he had serious injuries. It hasn't been publicly released what sort of injuries those were, but we believe they were self inflicted. And these injuries were so severe that Clifford has been in treatment ever since. When investigators finally tracked him down, he was seriously injured. Obviously, we've talked about that. He's been in the hospital ever since. And it appears that these were self inflicted wounds, almost like he was attempting to commit suicide. So, to me, I'm wondering if that leans toward consciousness of guilt after allegedly committing this triple homicide, then trying to take your own life. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, I think that's an excellent point here. I mean, if you're suspected in this terrible homicide, triple homicide, and your response is that you flee. Obviously, the scene, they have some closed circuit television that shows that, and then you go to a cemetery, and it appears try to commit suicide. So that is um, certainly an indication of guilt. It's like fleeing, I would argue. When you flee from the police after a crime, it is indicative of guilt. So I would certainly, if I was the prosecutors or the barristers or however they uh, refer to themselves in the UK, that's going to be something that's going to be brought up.
And usually, I'm sure that investigators would want to speak to the suspect in the case. He's the one who likely knows the most about it, but he has been in treatment for some severe injuries since then. So, do you think that's a hindrance at all to the investigation, the fact that they haven't been able to speak with the suspect?
Well, yeah, I mean, at least, I know in the U.S., a suspect has no obligation to speak uh, to the police. You can refuse to talk to the police, and I'm sure the circumstances are similar in the UK. You don't have any responsibility to incriminate yourself. So, number one, an interview has to be voluntary and knowing, and it's helpful, obviously, if you have a statement. um, I personally, as a defense attorney, never recommend my clients making statements to the police because I don't necessarily think anything good can ever come out of that type of interview. But it's up to the suspect and his counsel, if he has counsel, to make that decision.
At the UK inquest this week, we learned Hannah was still alive with a crossbow in her chest when first responders arrived, and that she'd been the one to call them. But there's still the overarching question of why the attack happened in the first place. A lot of us are deducing that a motive in this crime could have been their past relationship because the suspect allegedly knew all of these people because of their past relationship. So, is that something investigators would look into as far as past search history, phone calls, text messages, things like that?
Well, certainly they're going to look at that sort of digital footprint. They're going to look back at all of the telephone calls, the texts, things like that, that show that this relationship was unraveling, and further support sort of this idea that there was problems, and this is ultimately the culmination of those problems, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, I'm sure that work has been done. They're already aware of that.
Though the details of the crime are particularly disturbing, it's the location of the crime scene, the UK, that probably played a slight factor in the attack. As far as the details of the crime, one of the reasons why it is making headlines is because of the gruesomeness as far as the crossbow attack. This is something
Mhm.
in the US we don't usually see. I mean, it seems pretty intimate and pretty gruesome, pretty severe. However, last time I talked to you, you pointed this out. In the UK, they have a lot different gun laws than we do here in the US. So the crossbow attack, while to us might seem novel, over there it's something that happens a bit more often. Is that right?
Right, and I think Sarah, when we talked in the past, there's actually specific laws in the UK with regard to possession of crossbows and things like that. But yeah, a crossbow is a weapon that's accessible in the UK. Guns are far more or less accessible. It's not like the U.S. Where we literally have more guns than we have people, and it's very easy to purchase a gun. It's very easy to get a gun. on the black market, so to speak. So we see people regularly massacred with firearms, and that's not something that you see in the UK. But the crossbow is a weapon of choice there.
This week's inquest, where we learned new details about the case, lasted for only 10 minutes before the coroner adjourned the hearing to allow for any future criminal proceedings. With that route, there are several factors that need to be considered. So, as far as the suspect, we're unclear about his condition as of right now. We know that it was pretty severe and he's been treated, but we're unclear whether he's going to pull through, what that's going to look like. But
Mhm.
let's say that he does, that he's treated and comes back to consciousness, whatever it may be. And prosecutors over in the UK are hoping to move forward with charges. Do you think they have a strong case right now?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that they have a strong case because of the relationship. There's a motive, okay? Although you don't necessarily need a motive, they have a motive here. You have video of him leaving in close proximity to the time that these offenses occurred. You have the idea of flight. You have the idea of him trying to take his own life. We don't know what these 999 calls actually say. Uh, we know that they were made, but we don't know if the victim identified, her attacker, and that as well is going to be important. And ultimately, we don't know, what his position as a defendant in this case is going to be. Will he take responsibility? So there's a lot of factors, but I would say at the outset, yeah, there's a strong case here against him.
Then there's the question of Clifford's potential defense. But talking to you as a defense attorney,
Yeah.
what do you think about his case? Is it possible that he could have a strong defense?
Well, I would first, as a defense attorney, look at the idea, of mitigation. Does he have some mental health issues? Does he have some, debilitating problem that caused him to act out in this, ferocious, horrendous way? In every case, you have to look at what the facts are that are facing your client, but also what I always think is extremely important in every case is who your client is and what the circumstances are that brought it about. You don't necessarily want your client just to be thought of as a case file. You want the prosecutors, you want the court to know his background and what may have precipitated conduct, however outrageous it is. Is there some underlying issue there? And the other thing is, we don't know his mental state. Could it be that at this point, even though he's recovering from his physical injuries, has he been deemed incompetent? Is he not competent at this point to be interviewed or to be prosecuted? So there's a lot of issues that we can just speculate about with regard to this case, because it's not as though we've had hearings and other things because he's been unable to appear. So we have scant information, and we're just trying to piece it together. At this point, the one issue is, I understand that he has physical injuries, but normally, uh, unless in some way he's incapacitated because of these injuries, maybe he has some mental defect as a result of these injuries, which makes him incompetent. Because normally, 3 weeks, 4 weeks after you've had some physical injuries, they're going to take you to be, as we, a first appearance of court, in the US, would be an arraignment. These things would have happened if his injuries were merely physical. If in some way it's these injuries have affected his capacity to understand, or to participate in his own defense, that's a completely different story.
We haven't heard much from BBC commentator John Hunt since the attack, except in a statement made on July 13th with his surviving daughter, Amy. It reads, quote, "The devastation that we are experiencing cannot be put into words. We would like to thank people for their kind messages and for the support we have received in recent days. These have provided great comfort to us, for which we are very grateful. As you can imagine, this is an extremely difficult time for us, and we need that time and space to come to terms with what has happened and start the grieving process. While this is happening, we would ask that our privacy and that of our wider family and relations be respected at this time. Thank you." A GoFundMe page for the Hunt family has already raised more than €115,000. It's unclear what kind of condition Kyle Clifford is in at this time, so that puts legal proceedings on hold, at least for the time being. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.